Thank you all for coming. I'd like to call this public hearing of the Board of Finance to order for Tuesday, March 12th, 2019. We have this meeting every year at this time of year. The purpose of the meeting is to give members of the public a chance to articulate their thoughts regarding both the Board of Selectmen budget and the Board of Education budget. And we'll hear those comments now, and that really is the kickoff to our review process. So it's actually quite important that we hear from you. We want to take in what you've said, and any counsel you would, or advice that you would have for us, I think is quite important. So the way this works is several folks have come up here to sign up, and we'll go in the order that everyone signed up here on this list. If anyone else would like to speak, I'll just ask at the end, and we can take as many comments as the public would like to offer. We're going to start tonight with John Cini, who's the chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission. He's going to speak first because he has another meeting to go to tonight. Mr. Cini.
Thank you, sir. If anybody wants to join us upstairs at the Planning and Zoning public hearing after this, you're more than welcome.
This is a much more popular meeting, sorry.
So I have a few comments as my role at P&Z chair and also as a citizen and taxpayer in Darien. So hopefully I'll take about 5 minutes and then get out of the way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman Zagrodzky, for allowing me to cut the line as well. So members of the Board of Finance, as John said, is John Cini. I'm here tonight not only to address you as the chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission, but as a 19-year resident, parent, and taxpayer. I extend my appreciation to everybody who's worked on this budget for his or her hard work. I know it's an arduous process watching from afar. I think one of the only benefits of P&Z is we don't have to be involved in the budget process. So that's a enjoyable aspect. And I'm advertising for my replacement on that commission. So please see me afterwards if you have any questions. So I'm going to begin my comments as a representative of the Planning and Zoning Commission. When Planning and Zoning approved the property site plan and special permit in 2018 for the Highland Farm acquisition and special permit use, one of the key requirements of the final resolution was to provide paved parking lots with an adequate number of parking spaces in order to support the Parks and Recs activities at the site. We had a number of experts testify in terms of the drainage and the type of pavement that's being used. And also the number of parking lots was important to divide the traffic flow between the two parking lots and the layout. So I just want you to know that it's quite important in terms of capacity and also safety of the area. Residents really haven't been able to access the site in the 3 years that the town's owned it. It's not been 3 years, but this will be the third season, spring season, that they haven't been able to use it. And it's very important that they gain access. That's one of the stipulations of the final resolution, that there's a permanent lot so that Parks and Rec can provide scheduled activities on the site. We have, or the town has, put in a temporary parking lot, but that's proven to be inadequate. There's a big mud hole, mud pit. I believe Mr. Palin's been driving around in that in the Jeep once in a while. But all joking aside, it's really important we get those paved lots in. So I'm in full support of funding the capital request for the two parking lots at Highland Farms. While the commission approved the walking path loop, its construction does not come into play in terms of as a requirement to allow access to the site. So I just wanted to let you know. So from this point on, I'm going to make it clear that I'm speaking to you as a resident, taxpayer, and parent of 3 wonderful boys in the Darien school system. As I said, I think this budget process was probably arduous, a challenge, but I don't think we've seen anything yet as a town and what's coming our way over ensuing years. Darien's taxpayers are about to experience a new economic reality inflicted by Connecticut's fiscal crisis, or as I like to call it, the state's fiscal dumpster fire. Monumental challenges such as teacher pension sharing, regionalization, and/or the formation of centralized school taxing districts. And this stuff's real. I know some push it off as maybe not realistic, but given the majority right now in Hartford, I think anything is definitely possible. The elimination of grants and cost sharing, unfunded education mandates, redistribution of car taxes, higher sales taxes, tolls, state property taxes are all on the table this year in Hartford. This means that we're likely to face a tough reality when we convene in this auditorium next year. 19 years ago to this month, my wife Michelle and I relocated from Port Washington, Long Island to this town. We were in our mid or late 20-somethings, and it was shortly before our 3 boys entered the world. We searched for a town to settle down in, and our primary consideration was, and as you're likely to hear tonight, and repeated over and over, was the quality of the school district. However, just as importantly in our decision, I think in many others, was Darien's relatively low property taxes as compared to Long Island and Westchester in New Jersey. What's interesting even back then was Darien's public schools had already a tremendous reputation. Remember, this is before the district had a new Darien High School and a new Tokenique Elementary School, elementary assistant principals, special education facilitators, and I have a child in special ed, so they are important. Curriculum leaders, additional guidance counselors, the assistant athletic director, 1 and now likely 2 SROs and elementary security guards, 1 enlarged high school cafeteria, classroom air conditioners, 2 taxpayer-funded turf fields, and an elementary world language program. That all predated or came about as my children grew up. And were not there when we joined this town in 2000. In his September 2017 State of the Town address, Chairman Zagrodzky astutely calculated long-term cost of hiring a mid-tier town employee and concluded it is shockingly high. John, I think you defined it as over 20 years, 2 mid-tier employees with benefits and retirement benefits and salaries would accrue $7 million in costs to the town. Only after a couple decades of that employment, as I said, over 20 years. However, after you made these comments 2 years ago, just 2 years ago, this proposed budget seeks headcount additions, more than a couple. Good school districts are found throughout the tri-state region. However, it should not be lost that our community retains its relative attractiveness partly because of its still reasonable property taxes relative to other Metro New York communities. The unfortunate reality is Connecticut's income tax advantage versus its surrounding states has dissipated. I mean, I think I saw an article we're the 2nd highest tax state now in the nation. Second only to Illinois, unfortunately. As a result, we're starting to see this reality reflected in the stunning, and I mean stunning, increase in the homes for sale, the inventories of those homes for sale, while our home values have remained stagnant for over a decade. I mean, that's the new reality living in Connecticut and most of the Northeast, I gather. Our grand list modestly declined with its latest reval, even despite the several redevelopment projects that our commission has passed under my tenure over the last 5.5 years, but even before that. As I outlined a few minutes earlier, we're about to experience a budget abyss, the likes we've never seen before. Yet, we are here tonight talking about a proposed budget that will deliver an average property tax increase of 4%, give or take, depending on how you fund certain aspects of it. And I consider myself kind of in the know in this town, and that 4 handle actually surprised me when I first heard it. So there's an old saying, whistling past the graveyard. Well, I wonder if we're all whistling past this fiscal dumpster fire that we're experiencing. And are we ignoring what is in store for us in the not-so-distant future? I think we can and should do better for our taxpayers. I challenge our elected boards to create a budget strategy that continues to find effective ways to fund our great town and schools, but in a way that meets taxpayer expectations, rather than relying on the past strategies in which we have aimed to make our great town and schools even greater by adding services, adding headcount, adding properties, adding cost. I just want to thank you all for your time this evening and your active volunteerism. I know this is not going to be an easy decision or easy discussion as it progresses through this board and the RTM. But I wish you all good luck, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sini. Appreciate it. Okay, we'll go back to our regularly scheduled programming. Sarah Parent and Julie Best. Sure. Thanks.
Good evening. I'm Julie Best.
And I'm Sarah Parent. We are the co-chairs of CDSP, the Council of Darien School Parents. We stand before you to voice CDSP's complete support for the 2019-2020 Board of Education budget. We are grateful for the opportunity to speak here tonight. We are also grateful for the many hours spent by the district administration and the Board of Ed to develop a budget that allows the Darien Public Schools to continue to offer an excellent education to all Darien students. As Mrs. Ackman stated last week, 92% of the budget is due to contractual obligations. As such, simply maintaining status quo requires a percentage increase. In the grand scheme of things, there's not a lot of wiggle room in the Board of Ed's budget. We believe the modest 2.61% increase has come from thoughtful deliberation, and we are pleased that the Board of Ed has clearly prioritized Darien's children in this budget. We know that there's been much discussion over the past few months about what Darien can expect from Hartford. We recognize, and we know that you do as well, that Darien must operate as though it will receive little, if any, funding from Hartford going forward. Clearly, that affects our budgets, and in turn our mill rate and what comes out of our pockets. Whether you agree or not with what's previously happened in our state's capital and what's currently happening there, we all must do what we can to ensure that Darien continues its tradition of excellence in all areas. We know that Darien is well managed, and we expect nothing less in the challenging years ahead. Back to the education budget. We're thrilled the district has prioritized educating the whole child in this year's budget. In our children's increasingly complex world, schools have become more than a place to learn to read, to write, and to think. State mandates now require that the schools implement a social and emotional curriculum, and the Board of Education has as one of its goals to, quote, support students in being productive citizens and practicing healthy behaviors through a whole school, whole community, whole child model for health and wellness, end quote. Therefore, we are strong advocates for adding the additional guidance counselor at Middlesex and adding the 4 elementary psychologists. So there are 2 psychologists in each elementary school. You'll hear later from others about the guidance counselor. Julie's going to say a few things about the psychologist.
Thank you. We believe the need for this extra support is very real, and the additional FTEs are more than necessary. Mental, behavioral, and developmental disorders begin in early childhood, and they are on the rise. According to the CDC, nearly 1 in 5 children aged 3 to 17 have a mental, emotional, or behavioral disorder like anxiety, depression, ADHD, etc. And 1 in 6 U.S. children aged 2 to 8 years, so 17.4%, had a diagnosed mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder. Parents are telling us that their children are in need, and they support adding this staff. One parent shared that already her kindergarten son has little joy as he goes off to school in the morning. He is emotionally exhausted. From what we're hearing from many parents, that little boy is not alone. A Darien High School parent dreamed, imagine the success of all of our students if our teachers can deliver an uninterrupted day of instruction to fully engaged students. And another parent said at the Board of Ed public hearing, we ask you to consider the cost of not adding these psychologists to the budget, suggesting that the cost of these FTEs pales in comparison to the future costs that might come from not meeting our children's current mental health needs. Our elementary school principals are telling us unanimously that the need is critical. At the January 15 Board of Ed meeting, the principals described need or crisis situations ranging from dealing with the death of a parent, a family member, a staff member, divorce, illness of a student, illness of a parent, social media bullying, school avoidance, anxiety, depression, disruption to the rest of the class, and the societal impacts of suicide and school shootings. According to Mary Michelson, the principal at Tokenique, these things affect our children in our elementary schools every single day. While the price of adding the psychologist is clearly stated in the budget, we believe the value will be far greater. We know that early intervention leads to improved outcomes, So it is reasonable to assume that identifying and managing situations early can prevent small struggles from becoming more complex and potentially more costly conditions. Proactive measures, including better implementation of the social emotional learning curriculum, can teach our children how to help themselves and each other, also to prevent potential issues or escalations down the road. This can better prepare them for the increasing academic and social pressures of middle school and high school. We may find in time that fewer situations arise at the secondary level. Psychologists will now have time to offer additional services to the faculty and staff, including better support for managing situations. In turn, we can hope for less teacher burnout, greater retention of employees, and perhaps less absenteeism and fewer substitutes. Our elementary schools are simply understaffed in the area of mental health support. The current ratio of mental health professionals to students in Darien elementary schools is 1 professional to 454 students. That is by far the worst in our DIRG. Of the 454 students on average at each elementary school, all 454 of them have mental health, and each will benefit from additional support.
We know that there's always a delicate balance of what to include in a particular budget each year. As we've stated before, we are thrilled that this year's focus has been the mental health of Darien's children. That said, Darien schools also have other significant issues that must be discussed and managed in the years to come. We very much appreciate the comments made last week by members of the Board of Finance stating that there seems to be an appetite for additional facilities improvements in the near future. Darien's parents are grateful to the Board of Finance for helping the new Oxford School project move along as quickly as possible. We hope that you will be as responsive to and supportive of the other significant capital projects coming in the next few years. In closing, we thank you for your dedication and time to Darien, and we very much appreciate your continued support of our children.
Thank you very much. Lila Buckboon and Michelle Tracy. It's my job to put your names. I do a good job with that, by the way, just for the note.
Good evening. Thank you to the Board of Finance for giving the public an opportunity to speak tonight and for all the time and dedication you give to the town of Darien. And thank you to the Board of Education for helping to shape and improve what we believe is a fiscally sound budget. My name is Michelle Tracy, and I live at 13 Du Bois Street.
My name is Leela Buckjune, and I live at 12 Du Bois Street. We both have children at Hindley and Middlesex Middle School. We are the budget co-chairs for CDSP, and we are here tonight to give our support for the 2019-2020 school budget. One of the primary reasons we moved to Darien was because of its great schools. We think it is important to continually invest in our curriculum, technology, and facilities. We also believe that for children to be able to learn to the best of their abilities, we need to foster a school environment that supports the social and emotional needs of all students. The addition of a guidance counselor at Middlesex is a hire that we emphatically support. We believe that the costs associated with this new hire are well worth it. Mental health issues are rising, not only in Darien, but across the country. In fact, according to the Child Mind Institute, in the past 10 years, there has been a 17% increase in anxiety disorders in youth. Currently, there are 5 counselors at Middlesex, divided among 3 grades. As a result, some counselors service students across multiple grade levels. This can cause scheduling conflicts and stress the counselor's time.
As a part of the Middlesex School Vision, the counseling program is taking on an expanding role. Counselors provide direct classroom instructions about decision-making, career interests, and getting along with peers. They provide a safe environment for students to learn ways to problem solve, make friends, and improve self-esteem. They support students through the often confusing and daunting 6th and 9th grade transitions. Counselors promote the social, emotional, and academic growth of students in a supportive community, and they collaborate with teachers, administrators, and parents about best practices and developmental issues. A 6th counselor would enable the counselors to travel with the students for the 3 years they are at the middle school, thus creating a continuity that would allow for a deeper relationship between students and their counselors. We believe that these relationships will allow for proactive intervention and the opportunity to deal with social, emotional issues when they arise, thus preventing greater problems down the road as middle schoolers transition to high school. As we all know, the middle school years are both emotionally and academically stressful. Access to quality school counseling has a direct impact on student success. A smaller caseload would allow counselors to develop relationships with each of their students and better prepare them to overcome challenges and obstacles to their academic success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tiffany O'Connor.
Good evening. I'm Tiffany O'Connor, and I live at 48 Lewarden Road. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Darien High School Parents Association, and my co-chair is Lori Olson. Parents often talk to us about concerns regarding their high school students. I'd like to share a few of those, along with the improvement we've observed so far and believe will continue with the recommended budget increase in curricular supervision. Before the implementation of department chairs, we received frequent complaints from parents about teaching inconsistencies and transition issues from the middle school to the high school. Based on parent feedback, there seem to be fewer problems with consistency now. When issues are identified, parents report that department chairs work hard to find solutions and make needed changes. However, we believe such changes to address inconsistency or any other problem within a department will be more effective and proactive when department chairs can focus completely on these issues. While the department chairs have better aligned expectations of students transitioning from the middle school to the high school, we think there is more work to be done. But the current department chair teachers cannot be everywhere they are needed, limiting the change they can facilitate, which is why we support fully allocating department chairs to their supervisory roles. And I'd like to add, this isn't on my speech, these are very, very conscientious people, these department chairs, and truly if they could be two places at once, they would be. Back to my speech. Lori and I have talked to some of these department chairs, and they believe that they'll be able to better serve all students with this role change. They'll have more time to focus their attention on all students, all teachers in the department, and on the curriculum. Not just curriculum consistency, but improvements to the curriculum. They will be able to observe more classes to achieve these goals and have more time to provide help and guidance to new teachers in their departments. And although they will no longer be teaching classes, they will be able to focus on the academic needs of all students with more time and flexibility to work with students and teachers in all of the department's classes. Lastly, we are disappointed that the high school security booth was moved to a Level 2 priority capital project, especially since the cost estimates will likely be completed by the end of this school year. We have listened carefully to details of the administration's progress so far, which includes environmental studies and discussions with planning and zoning, thorough traffic studies coordinated with the police, as well as recommendations and support from the police chief. And we agree that the high school is unprotected. When people drive to other schools in Darien, they do so to drop off children, to attend a meeting at the school, or for some other school-related purpose. But Darien High School is the only school in town that is a cut-through to anyone and everyone. This fall, an intoxicated driver drove into the school's loop, jumped the curb, crashed into a guardrail about 15 minutes after school was dismissed. Many parents have reached out to us with questions and concerns about security, and we will be watching closely to ensure that the security booth is moved back to a Level 1 priority next year. We understand that the Board of Education is awaiting more information, but we would like for the Board of Finance and any other town organizations involved in the funding of this project to please make the security booth a priority for next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Beth Lane. Yeah, I got Beth Lane right. It's really impressive.
Good evening. My name is Beth Lane, and I live at 16 Hillcrest Avenue. I'm here tonight to voice my support for the Board of Education budget. In particular, I support the addition of 4 psychologists in the elementary schools. While I know FTEs such as these psychologists are a longer-term expense than, say, middle school magazine subscriptions, the elementary schools desperately need the additional support. I have 3 children in our school system, 1 at each school level. 2 of them have sailed through the schools with relative ease, and being an optimist, I expected the same of the 3rd. Imagine my surprise when at the beginning of 4th grade, my youngest child reported that she couldn't go to school because she had horrible stomach aches. When I tried to get to the bottom of her anxiety, she blurted out that she was afraid that if she went to school, I would die while she was out of the house. I'm a pretty practical person, and I feel pretty confident in my parenting decisions for the most part. I say no a lot and stick to it. I don't try to be my children's best friend, and I give my kids a fair amount of autonomy. So normally, I tend to be decisive when confronting new situations. But in this case, I had no idea what to do. I managed to get her to agree to go to school to see the nurse, who quickly realized that my child's stomach ache was a physical manifestation of mental anguish. Fortunately, it was the very beginning of the school year, which means that the psychologist did not yet have the back-to-back meetings she would have only a few weeks later. She could drop everything and meet with us instantly. After 20 really long minutes speaking to the psychologist, my child agreed to go into her classroom. We've been fortunate. She hasn't needed any special interventions to get to school since that day, but this same scenario, or a more difficult one, plays out all the time at our schools. For most of the year, though, the psychologist needs to frantically rearrange already packed schedule to fit in kids' crises. And as we know, crises are notoriously immune to scheduling. In an ideal world, children wouldn't be going through the crippling anxiety and depression that our society seems to produce. Bear in mind, this is not a Darien-specific problem or even a Fairfield County problem. Nationwide, the levels of anxiety and stress in children have been growing quickly. A bunch of anxiety-plagued children are not in the best position to learn from the teachers we employ. Ideally, children would be able to engage with their classes, but sometimes the first thing they need to learn is how to deal with their own mental health. Darien has a social and emotional learning curriculum that has been drafted, but which requires substantial time from school psychologists to implement properly. Given that they already have overloaded schedules, this hasn't happened as fully as we'd like. The addition of a psychologist in each elementary school would free up time for this. Hopefully, the new social emotional learning curriculum will do as much to help other children with their anxiety as the psychologist was able to help my child. For these reasons, I completely support the addition of 4 school psychologists in the elementary schools, and I'm happy to support this budget as a taxpayer. And I'd note that I am a taxpayer, and my expectations are that we should be supporting our children's most basic needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mia Miopoulos and Ann Gallagher. No, thank you. You're getting better. Hard to believe.
Good evening. I am Mia Mahopoulos, and this is Ann Gallagher, and we are the Royal PTO co-chairs. Since there are so many people speaking tonight, we will be brief, even if you've heard these messages before. We are here to echo our support for this year's proposed budget, and we strongly support the inclusion of the 4 elementary psychologists and the Middlesex counselor as part of the budget increase. As you are no doubt aware, mental health concerns are a national crisis. This is not just specific to Darien. This is not an affluenza issue. It is affecting children in all parts of our country, and leaders across the country are standing up and taking note. We are asking our town leaders to do the same, and they certainly are trying. Our school administration has developed and started implementing a social emotional curriculum, which is a great start, but we need staff members at our schools who can roll it out, support it, and make it a complete success. In addition, we need professionals available to serve the mental health needs of all of our students, not just those receiving services. The regionalization hysteria, which is rightfully creating major angst for many in our town, has only refocused everyone's awareness on how lucky we are to have such a strong school system and our community's desire to keep it that way.
So many of us taxpayers with young children moved to this amazing town in large part because of the school system, and we need to continue to support the standard of excellence that our district has always strived to maintain.
We understand that FTE budget additions have multiple layers of consideration and must always be vetted carefully. But in addition, we hope that you have taken note of how critical the administration and our parents feel that this particular need is for our schools. Not approving these expenditures may minimize budget costs in the short term, but we would hate to have to quantify the damage done after the fact if we are short-sighted and don't focus on properly serving our students' mental health needs. Sure, some may say, it wasn't like this when we were growing up and we didn't need all of the support, so why do the kids need this now? But regardless as to how our culture has arrived at this point, we have a responsibility to support this generation of students and the very real issues they face. We are proud to be part of the Darien Public School System. We appreciate the time and effort that all of our volunteers and elected and appointed officials put into making sure that Darien stays ahead of the curve. And we applaud you for making the tough strategic decisions proactively and putting not just the academic, but also the physical and emotional needs of our children at the top of our community's education list. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ethan Madsen.
Hello, my name is Ethan Madsen. I'm a resident of Darien. I live at 10 Musket Lane. Thank you to the board for allowing me to speak. I have two daughters at Tokenique Elementary in the 3rd and 4th grade, and I'm here to voice my support for the town budget, specifically the elementary school budget, for the 4 additional school psychologists. I think that as a taxpayer, we selected Darien, obviously for its school systems, and as a taxpayer, I support the incremental costs associated with providing the school psychologists. I think that it's part of our responsibility. We have the means, the ability. We're a AAA-rated municipality, and I think that it's the right thing to do for the students, not just for my girls, but I think that throughout the continuum of education is important. And I liked how Julie Best put it, the cost of not doing this, the opportunity cost that we forego by not doing this may outweigh the immediate costs of doing it. So just wanted to give my support for it.
Terrific, thank you. Marion Cope.
Good evening. As you heard, I'm Marion Cope, and I've been a resident of Darien for the last 15 years, and I have 3 children in the public school system. Before I proceed, I'd like to thank all of you for your service to the community. I truly appreciate all your time and effort. Tonight, I'm here to also support both the education and the finance budgets in their entirety. And I'd like to stress my support for a few important line items, which include the 4 psychologists, as well as the guidance counselor for the middle school. The 4 psychologists are obviously for the elementary school. And I stress my support of them because they will significantly improve the school environment for students and help reduce access to drugs by students and others. The first item to which I refer is in the education budget. It involves the addition of the 4 psychologists in the elementary schools and the additional guidance counselor in middle sex. These mental health professionals are resources that are necessary to identify and help isolated and victimized children, as well as bullies and others, work through their issues. These proactive measures will help meet the needs of an increased number of students with social and emotional issues and improve the school environment for all. The next line item that I'd like to discuss is in the finance budget and pertains to the addition of 3 civilian dispatchers to the police department. This change will make our police department more efficient and effective, as police officers will be deployed as a dedicated SRO for the middle school, and an officer dedicated to narcotics law enforcement. An SRO will deter bad behavior and respond promptly in the event of inappropriate behavior. A narcotics law enforcement officer will help deter and reduce the flow of drugs, which will benefit our schools and our town. This is critical given the opioid epidemic. In conclusion, these are both necessary additions to the education and finance budgets that will improve the environment in both our schools and our town. I respectfully request that you approve both budgets in their entirety for the benefit of our children, our educators, and our town. Thank you for listening and for all you do for the community.
Thank you very much. Steve Ridley.
Many thanks for having the opportunity to speak to you this evening. Good evening. My name is Steve Ridley, and I live at 287 Mansfield Avenue, and I have one child in third grade at Oxridge. And as he read this over my shoulder, he said, "You haven't mentioned my name," so his name is Elliot, if anyone wanted to know. I would describe my attendance here as an interested and motivated but slightly guilty parent. Myself and my wife are committed supporters of public education, and that commitment then drove us to one of the key decisions we all make in life, and that is where to live. Once that decision is made, a social, economic, and, to be honest, emotional commitment is then made to the place that you have chosen. We moved here almost 6 years ago after 14 years living in New York City, and as you can see, I'm trying desperately to suppress the Brooklyn accent. Our experience in Darien has been, without exaggeration, wonderful. A large part has been due to the delivery on that educational promise, so I thank both the Board of Education and the Board of Finance for helping in that delivery. And I offer my heartfelt thanks. However, like many in our community, I must confess to not being that vested in the very thing that both brought me here and anchors me here still. Hence, I'm a guilty parent. So my apologies if my comments are rather general and my commitments very much in the future. Our education system, quite frankly, underpins the social and economic well-being of our community. And in many respects, the health of that community can be directly assessed by the educational outcomes it delivers. Like many things in life, everything is connected. So to borrow from the Lion King, it's sort of very much the circle of life. I hardly need to tell this gathering that educational budgeting is a fine balancing act. It must understand the needs of the right now and balance them with those of the foreseeable and potentially unknown future. So, now having been pricked out of my guilty slumber, thank you, Katie, my interest and possibly concern is that there are now pressures both internal and external, and I have to be honest, I almost felt like praising my speech and actually saying from the first speaker from the Planning and Zoning Committee is that I could just say what he said. But there are pressures, both internal and external, which would fundamentally affect the delivery on that educational promise, which has implications, I think, way beyond the delivery of educational services. This, I suppose, in some way mirrors the pressures of modern life and that modern life puts on the youngest in our community. The balance between what society appears to demand and the realities of life can sometimes be very challenging to square away. So bringing it back to the here and now, I fully support the addition of 4 psychologists to service the elementary schools, as it enhances the district's capabilities to meet the needs of the youngest in our community as they face the increasing challenges that modern society throws at them. The adding of FTEs to any organisation is always a risk, as any business person knows, as the commitment is long-term and not easily undone. However, there would seem to be big challenges ahead, and ones that 4 new FTEs will not solve. It is vital that more guilty parents come forward to make their voices heard. So I suppose I make a commitment to the Board of Education and the Board of Finance, a personal one, that I want to go out and help wake these people up, so that when those challenges do appear, we are more prepared and we have more voices to talk to Hertford or whoever it might be needed talking to. And on a final note, the education system is a service to the community, and the ultimate judgment on any service is always at the point of application. So I'd like to take the opportunity to publicly thank Luke Forshaw and Kristen Ulrich and the entire academic and non-academic team at Oxridge for making our sons, and really, if I'm honest, my experience such a fulfilling one for the educational process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Tara Levinson.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Dr. Tara Levinson, and I live at 30 Pointer Woods Road. I have 3 children in the district, 2 at Darien High School and 1 fifth grader. I come to the meeting tonight to speak both as a parent and a professional. I'm a licensed psychologist and a nationally certified school psychologist. I personally have a private practice in Westport that specializes in children and adolescents. So I have a very unique perspective in the sense that I work very closely with a lot of the private and public school districts in Fairfield County. I'm also part of the Darien Thriving Youth Task Force. Thank you for considering the funding request for 4 additional school psychologists at the elementary school level. Not only does this request better align us with our neighboring districts in Fairfield County, but it also aligns us with the current research that focuses on positive behavior support, early intervention for social, emotional, and behavioral challenges, and accessing learning for all of our students. In the neighboring districts that I've had the opportunity to observe in, here are some of the support service resources I've found at the elementary level. New Canaan has 2 psychologists and 1 social worker at each elementary school. Westport, 2 psychologists at each elementary school. Wilton, which has a district level setup, in their 3rd to 5th grade building, 3 psychologists, 3 guidance counselors, and 1 social worker. Greenwich has one psychologist in each one of their buildings, but all the testing and evaluations are done through the central office. And Fairfield has 1 psychologist and 1 social worker at each elementary school. Each of these neighboring districts has already budgeted for additional staff to support the needs of our children. According to the American Psychological Association's Coalition for Psychology in Schools and Education, emotional well-being influences educational performance, learning, and development. According to the Coalition's report, emotional well-being is integral to successful everyday functioning in the classroom and influences academic performance and learning. It is also important to the interpersonal relationships, social development, and overall mental health. In order to foster success in Darien students in today's world, we need to invest in that infrastructure needed to develop healthy youth. This starts by providing access to resources at the elementary level to start building foundations to problem solve, manage conflicts, and build healthy coping skills. If our students are not emotionally healthy and strong, they are not available to be lifelong learners. We see increases in the rise of mental health issues among youth and adolescents, both locally and nationally. More and more children are presenting with clinical issues related to anxiety, depression, and self-regulation skills at much younger ages. When I speak with my colleagues, the number of referrals continues to grow exponentially, and there's an unmet need to support the health development in our youth. Many of the children that get referred to us could have been supported at an early intervention level if they had been given the skills and tools needed. In addition, research clearly demonstrates the most effective place to teach social and emotional skills is in the natural setting, i.e. the school environment. I have worked as a school psychologist in the past and understand the demands that are placed on individuals in these positions. There are so many mandated requirements related to testing and assessment. There's little room left to build relationships with the children in the classroom, work with at-risk students, and implement programs that benefit the mental health and well-being of all children in the classroom. If we are able to focus some of our resources on providing those school-wide curriculums that teach social emotional learning and coping skills, more students would be able to thrive. I know that the board recognizes the need for these resources in the schools, but I want to talk about the financial commitment. I would put forth to the district that funding these positions is a fiscally responsible action to take. First, over time, the aggregated cost for sending students out of district or providing other mental health-related services is much higher. For example, an out-of-district placement for one student at a private school that supports emotional and behavioral needs, for example, like Spire or Westport Day School, is approximately $70,000 a year. That is the cost of funding one psychologist position for an entire year. Second, having additional school psychologist resources throughout the building to support and advocate for the behavioral and emotional needs of our students allows the teachers to focus on teaching and learning. When I get to observe in classrooms and I see a child struggling with either emotional, behavioral issues, it doesn't just impact that child. It actually impacts the ability for all students to engage in the learning process. And third, teaching stronger and adaptive coping skills from an early age increases the resiliency in our youth, which ultimately allows them to be more resourceful and productive members of our own community. I want to express my full support for the proposed budget, and I want to thank you again for your time tonight.
Thank you very much. That gets to the end of the speakers that we had on the list tonight. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to say? Okay. Normally I don't say anything at these meetings, but I'm going to take just a few minutes to do so. If you would indulge me, I won't take long. I'd like to stress that the Board of Finance's role in all of this really doesn't start with this hearing or some of the recent meetings that you've seen us have. It actually starts much earlier than that. One of the things that we try to do as a board is to integrate ourselves into the budget thinking of both the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen so that we can make our desires, our interests, and our points in terms of representing the taxpayer very clear early on in the process instead of trying to articulate them later. And so if you think about that, a lot of the things that we do center around things like encouraging economy, flashing the types of budget or percentage increases that we'd like the two boards to aspire to, encouraging them to have a clear and sort of fact-based set of recommendations that lead to the proposals that they want, particularly if they're going to increase spending or increase staffing, and then to provide real transparency in that, and further to provide analysis of that, to say, look, this is not only what we're doing, but why we're doing it, and we can demonstrate that this is something that's actually very important, and then finally have metrics in place that they can measure it so that later on, if it's in fact not working, that they can unwind it or make a change. I've been satisfied up to this point, particularly on the discussion of psychologists, that the Board of Education has in fact done that. They've spent a lot of time trying to illustrate why that's important. They've provided a lot of transparency, a fair bit of analysis. I'll give that a B-, but it could have been much worse. And then on metrics, I would encourage them to further think about it. But if you think about this, right, our role is not to come in and question whether psychologists are necessary. I'm not a professional with any of that. I don't know. But I can encourage the things that are around that to ensure that the decision-making to get to that point includes these important things. I would urge everybody that when you think about whether something's being proposed by the Board of Education or the Board of Selectmen, think about these types of things. It's very important. It helps us get to better decision-making, and it helps us measure the impact of those decisions long-term. I guess the only other comments that I have is I've been on this board for more than a decade. I've actually never seen the Board of Finance do something irresponsible with regard to either the Board of Education or the Board of Selectmen budget. We take that role very seriously. We understand why most of us are here, which is to take advantage of the school system and all that it offers. And certainly as long as I'm chairman, we're not going to do something that's silly or stupid or inconsistent with maintaining excellent schools. We're going to work behind the scenes to make sure a lot of this is done, but at the moment that it's important, we're not going to do something foolish. And while I appreciate everybody coming here and expressing their thoughts, and I certainly encourage that, I want everybody to continue to do that in the future, I'd actually like to suggest a mild change in your strategy. In the 10 years that I've been on this board, it's a long time, this is the first time that I've really seen a legislative threat from Hartford that could have a significant impact on what everyone here has shown up to try to defend and enhance. This is the first time I've seen something that's really serious, and I think all of us need to stand up and start to pay attention to what's going on. These proposals to regionalize school districts and to create sort of separate autonomous taxing districts, yes, they're in the beginning stages, and I get that there's going to be discussions and dialogue, and that's all fine. These are very serious proposals. They have the potential for significantly changing how not just school services are delivered in this town, but how town government works. These taxing districts, for example, envision a world where the Board of Education operates completely separately. Everything they do, from spending to taxation to borrowing for capital projects, is all done separately. under their sole and exclusive purview with no input from anybody else. That includes this board, the RTM, the Board of Selectmen, anybody. Maybe that's okay, but that creates divided government in this town and a very, very different operating environment. You're also going to have two sources of property taxes, the ones that you pay to support the town and a very separate one that's used to support schools. I'm not saying that that's potentially bad, but it does set the table for some other significant changes. With a separate taxing authority and separately derived property taxes, it's very easy to see a regionalization of either school districts or school boards or taxing authorities at a regional or, dare I say, a state level. These are very serious things that because of some of this proposed legislation, this can happen to this town. So it's wonderful to have everybody here this evening. I would challenge you to think about taking this enthusiasm and driving up to Hartford. It's time for everybody to stand up and pay attention to what's going on, to get informed about these bills, to read them carefully, and to contact your representatives and to speak up in Hartford, and make your voice known. Make sure you understand all of this and that you're involved early in the process. These anodyne comments that you read in the paper that say, oh, don't worry, everyone needs to relax, let the process play out, let these conversations take place. I promise you that if you do that, by the time all this gets finished with these conversations, it's going to be too late to influence these decisions. So it's very important to take the time and to focus on this right now. And I say this because whereas it's important to have these kinds of discussions tonight, which I continue to encourage, I would argue that you face far more challenges in trying to get an outcome in Hartford that is going to be conducive to maintaining our excellent schools in Darien than anything you would face from this board or from the RTM. So please get involved. I would be personally happy to help serve as a voice for any of this. So if anybody wants to contact me and say, we'd like you to come up and help us with this problem, help us analyze and figure out how we could come up with a unified voice in Hartford and say those words at a hearing, I will do it. But this is something that certainly has my attention, and I would encourage everyone here to pay attention themselves, get informed, and get a seat at the table. Otherwise, you're not going to like what happens. Okay. Okay, that was all the comments that I had this evening. I'd like to thank everyone for coming and for taking the time to write out these comments and to make your voice heard. It's an important part of democracy generally, but an important part of the way this town works. So thank you very much. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Jim, second. Frank? We're adjourned. Thank you very much. Good evening.